Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke explain why voting motives, for example for Trump or Biden, are not as clear as they may initially first seem, why it is important to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also crucial to hold them to account for their decisions. I think we are recording now. Good. So today we are going to look at an article which analyzes a very difficult conversation topic, which is why, let me read it properly. I know why you voted for Trump on inferring motives based on choice. So, Elizabeth, why did you vote for Donald Trump?
Well, actually, I mean, that would be an interesting question, right? And probably if I revealed to you that I had voted for Trump, as you just proposed, you probably would think hard about that, right?
Yeah.
So, but if you'll indulge me, I kind of want to go backwards. I don't really want to start with the Trump study. So there's, I don't even know, like basically 7 studies here, right? And I kind of want to like jump around a little bit. I kind of repackage them so we can, kind of leave that for the only one studies, voting, for real. So I'd sort of like to go backwards. I want to start with the good news, which is the last study where they analyzed something really exciting, light bulbs. So, but it does have good news in it. So these authors, what are their names here? Barasz, it's Barasz, Kim and Evangelidis. I can't say these people's names.
I think it's Evangelidis. I don't know. It's Greek. It looks Greek to me. Yes. Kim, which is the easy one, which is presumably Korean. And Barasz, Spanish.
Yes. Well, yeah. So it's Spain, the United States, and Italy.
There we go.
3. Yeah. So this is an international collaboration here.
Very good.
So in the last study that they did, they gave people 2 choices on this really benign thing, light bulbs, and half of the people answered for themselves and half of the people answered for someone else. So they were given these light bulbs. They cost the same. They had the same wattage. They had the same lifespan. But one light bulb had a better eco-friendly score. And so they asked, everybody chose the light bulb that had the better eco-friendly score, basically. I mean, anybody who was paying attention. There were a few scattering people that didn't, but everybody chose light bulb A, which had the better eco-friendly score because it was equal on everything. They were equal on everything else. And they asked people, why did you choose this? And they said, well, all of the things, it's like, oh, I choose light bulbs based on price and wattage and, that kind of stuff. They didn't really emphasize the eco-friendly part. But when the participants were asked to explain why someone else would choose light bulb A, they said between, like 65 and 85% of the time, because, on the different combinations, that the other person would choose it because it was more eco-friendly. So the reason I wanted to start with this one is because people were assuming something good about another person, in fact, better than themselves, right? They were like, other people care about the environment, maybe even more than I do. Now, again, they weren't comparing themselves to others specifically in this because they were either answering for themselves or they were answering for others. But basically, they were attributing another person a more positive sort of reasoning strategy for purchasing. So I kind of wanted to start with the good news. And then they did 3 studies about why someone would choose to accept a job in another city. And so and this actually seemed to come out of one of the authors' actual experiences, where they had asked someone who'd found somebody took a job, and they said, "Oh, did you take, in Florida?" And they said, "Oh, you must love the warm weather." And the person was like, "Actually, the weather didn't have anything to do with why I chose that job. There were other attributes about the job." So they included 3 studies actually about the weather, and they asked people in the one study about Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Fort Worth, Texas. Now, I don't know anything about the weather in either one of these places specifically, but they're both sort of in the South. And, it really didn't matter because they either asked people, how's the weather in Fort Lauderdale or Fort Worth, Texas? And then why did Julia, fictitious Julia, choose to move there? And the better they thought the weather was in whichever city, whatever city it was, the better the weather they thought it was there, the more likely they were to say that Julia chose the job because of the weather. Even though most of us wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm only choosing a job because of the weather."
Because of the weather, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then in another study, they did a generic city so that no one would have a predisposed notion about what was going on in the city. The job prospects in City A and City B were the same. The cost of living, same. The weather, though, was better in City B. They were asked for themselves, what would you pick? Everybody picks City B. Everything else is the same. Of course, I'm going to choose the better weather also. I mean, this is fictitious city, fictitious situation. I'm going to choose the one that has 3 good attributes. So everybody chooses City B for themselves. And then they get told that participant 2,782 also chose City B. Why did that person choose City B? Guess what? Because of the weather. So no matter what the configuration, if City B had good weather, they assumed that this fictitious person, participant number 2782, had chosen it because of the weather. When the cities were the same and both had average weather, people said the weather was the least important. So when they both had average weather, the weather is the least important, even when everything else was the same also. For study 4B, exactly the same, except they offered people a bonus. They said, you can bet, if you want, you can take the money. So these are Amazon Turk participants. So they participate for money, okay? And kind of depends on how long the survey is and that kind of stuff. So they said, you can bet your survey money and double it if you want by predicting what participant 2782, why she or he, I shouldn't say she, chose City B. And people, when the weather was good in City B, people were more likely to bet their money. So they were so sure that they knew why someone else would have chosen City B, which would have been the weather, that they bet their money. Now, everybody got paid, though. Don't worry. Don't worry about the Amazon Turk workers. Everybody got paid.
No animals were harmed. No animals were harmed.
In the making of this study. That's right.
Yeah.
One more weather study. In this one, they answered for themselves or for themselves and for the other person. Just counterbalanced whether they answered themselves first and then the other person, or the other person first and then themselves. Same City A and City B. Similar thing. Chose City B. If the weather's a little bit better. For themselves, again, chose City B, but said the weather was the least important aspect. When they then at the next iteration, like sort of the next part of the study, they were given City C, and they said, would you choose City C that has poor job prospects, poor cost of so a higher cost of living, but really great weather? Would you trade the at the, the sort of middling one with good weather for low job prospects, low cost of living, high cost of living, and but even better weather. They said they wouldn't do it, but they said the other participant, 2782, probably would. That weather was so important to that other person in their choice, then that they would probably choose, they would choose the better weather regardless of how crappy the city is. And then the first political study. So I'm I'm not quite going backwards. I don't really know why they ordered the studies the way that they did in the paper. But the first political study, very similar, but instead of weather and job prospects, and cost of living, they showed political candidates. And they said the candidates were more or less moderate was in the middle, more or less to the left or right of moderate on 4 attributes: individual rights, domestic issues, economy, and defense issues. So 4 attributes. Candidate A supposedly had all moderate. They're right down the middle. Sometimes candidate A had 1 extreme rating. Candidate B had extreme positions always. Okay. So sometimes candidate A was shown alone, and they asked people, why would you vote for candidate A? And of course, nothing stands out, right? Nothing stands out. Sometimes candidate A was shown with candidate B, and only candidate B had an extreme comparison position on one of the issues. Sometimes candidate A and B had something extreme. When A was all moderate, everything's rated equal. Why would someone choose candidate A? Oh, could have been for any of these reasons. They're clearly, they're clearly thinking, how would I know, right? It could be any of the reasons. When candidate A had an extreme position, obviously, that's why. When A was compared to B, the extreme position was always thought to be diagnostic. So even if candidate B had a extreme position so if candidate B had 2 extreme positions, candidate A had 1, it was whatever that singular extreme position was that they assumed was the reason. So what we're seeing here is that people are, again, they're using this something extreme as if they have insight into another person. So the theme throughout is anything extreme, whether it's a light bulb, whether it's the weather. It doesn't even have to be the real weather. It doesn't have, it can be just what they think the weather might be, or
Right.
fake weather. And then now on an extreme position for a candidate. Now, that gets us to study what is presented in the paper as study 1 with the sexy title, right? Because we have Trump in the title, right? I know why you voted for Trump. You got to put that in the title.
Are you trying to say that Trump is sexy?
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah. Well, when my students, when we would present at conferences, this was one of the big things, is to sit around, we'd have great fun sitting around thinking up titles for our presentations, so that people who are just wandering around, in the presentation area would see the title and come over, because the title is, we used to laugh. It's like, we have to come up with the sexy title, especially what comes before the colon, and, like, what comes before the colon has to be the, the attention grabber, right? And then colon, the real thing, right? So the real title is over inferring motives based on choice, but they got to have the thing before the colon, right, which is, I know why you voted for Trump.
I don't know if your experience of academic conferences is like mine, but God, the tedium in there, it's really not hard to sell me to get me into a presentation on something, because most of them are just so boring.
Yeah, psychology conferences are different because I think in your field, people actually read papers, right? They actually stand there and read papers, like in
Often.
like philosophy and stuff. They just stand at a podium and read their paper.
Philosophy tends to be better.
Oh, okay.
Education is like, and this is kind of like, you know what I mean, and I kind of like hop between fields, right? Um, Education is the worst, like, which is kind of ironic because you would have thought that education, well, okay, you've qualified in education and
They'd be
therefore
fun,
you're an
right?
educator, you're going to be really, no. I mean,
Yeah.
like, you get people who just literally just read papers. Or one of the fun ones you get is you get people who do you get poster presentations in psychology?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's what most
Okay,
of my students did was
right,
poster
okay.
presentations. Yeah.
So the poster presentations you'll see is you'll get people who are using their research budget to have a holiday because you'll see the same poster presentation in about 3 or 4 different conferences, like literally
Yeah.
the same, which is
Yeah.
technically plagiarism, self-plagiarism, but
Oh, you're
no.
not allowed to do that. Yeah. I would never have let them do that. But yeah, that's why, because when you're in this big venue where people are sort of spending their time, they get like coffee and water, and sometimes they get
Hmm.
some like snacks.
Yeah.
Um, the best time to present at the poster presentation is the first night, because then they have alcohol and they have hors d'oeuvres and all that kind of stuff. So if you get there if you get to be on the first night, then you get the most traffic. But yeah, so people are kind of wandering around, so you want them to see you,
You want to draw them
right?
in, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, sexy. That's the sexy title story. So,
And unless you're using your research budget for a holiday, in which case you don't really give a crap.
right, then it doesn't
But
matter.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what the authors present as study one in their paper. What they did was there was a a pilot study where they just enrolled like 50 people in Amazon Turk study, and they asked people what the uh, the perceived sort of reason, the most extreme uh, positions that Trump and Clinton, so it was Trump versus Clinton at the time, that Trump and Clinton had. So what were their most extreme positions? Okay. And so and they gave them, they gave them uh, the immigration, foreign policy, economic policy, the environment, and then they left one space for other. Okay, so people could fill in. What they found was that immigration was the uh, the highest rated as far as an extreme position for Trump. Okay, so 5 days before the election, so they probably did the other study, about a week before. They had everything all set. 5 days before the election, they surveyed. Uh, I actually don't know how many total people they surveyed. They chose 300 people who had voted by, already voted. Okay. By mail, I guess, or in a pre-election voting arrangement, either for Clinton or Trump. They got rid of people that voted. Those people were filtered like to another survey, probably. It's like they ask them if they're voting, and then they, sort them. So they chose 300, probably the first 300 people who voted for either Clinton or Trump to proceed to the study. They asked people to think about the reasons why they personally had voted the way that they voted. They also asked people how favorably they thought generally about people who voted the opposite of them. Okay. Most Trump voters said that they voted in this order. Why did you vote for Trump? Trump voters said, I voted for Trump because of policies on the economy, and then immigration, then foreign policy, then other reasons, and then the environment. Clinton voters thought Trump voters, okay, voted in this order because of his policies on immigration. So the thing that in the pilot study, people had said, was his most extreme position. Clinton voters thought that's why Trump voters, the majority of Trump voters had voted for Trump. Then the economy. So they flipped the first two. Okay.
Mm.
Then foreign policy, other, and the environment. So they had the other ones right, but they flipped the first two. Okay. And then the more Clinton voters thought that Trump voters weighed immigration, they also thought of Trump voters less favorably. Now, the authors do not they do not tell us what how Trump voters rated Clinton voters. We do not get that information in this study. So I don't know what their pilot study said Clinton's most extreme view was, because they don't include that. They also don't include, now I didn't go to the supplementary materials, and perhaps in the supplementary materials there's an explanation. Perhaps it's that nothing really stood out as much as the immigration stood out for Trump. That maybe there were so many others that they couldn't do the same analysis. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that's hence the sexy title, I Know Why You Voted for Trump, even though only one of the studies it has anything to do with Trump. The important thing here, I think, is that, and this goes back, it's funny because you opened with, so Elizabeth, why did you vote for Trump? Again, like, I think that because we know each other, if I said that, oh, I ended up voting for Trump, you would not assume it was for something as superficial as a single policy, right? Mm. Most likely, if we know someone, like, this is not the psychology of the people that we know, right? This is the psychology of a stranger, someone that we see in the grocery line, or a neighbor that we wave to, or whatever. This would not be about people that we know well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I've been accused by people I don't know of being a Trump voter, which is kind of amazing considering my accent.
You don't know. That's.
But no, I get that.
Okay.
Let me finish. I've been accused by people I don't know of being a Trump supporter, a Trump voter even, which is kind of astonishing given my accent, right? You'd hear me and think, like, this person has the ability to vote for Trump, which I don't. I think one of the great blessings of being a subject of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles at present has been that I don't have to make a decision between Biden or Trump, which is a great privilege. And I truly believe that you Americans should consider that as one of the benefits of coming back into the fold, so to speak. Appealing, is it not? But then again, I have had friends, certainly in my previous place of work, who were suspected of voting for Trump and didn't, and that was the basis for a cancellation.
Well, I'm not sure. I just don't know that. I don't know how friendly
I wouldn't say friends. I wouldn't say friend. Yeah, they weren't friends, but they were certainly knew each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just like the one study in here where people were asked first to judge themselves and then to judge the other. While it wasn't significant, they did back off on the extent to which they were biased. So that's why I didn't even mention it, because it wasn't significant. But there was a slight difference. Once people are sort of were asked to think about themselves, they did kind of realize, like, oh, maybe other people might do the same. It's a little bit of sort of what's called pluralistic ignorance, sort of thinking that everyone else has even though maybe, I mean, the classic study is college students drinking. Like, even though I'm a college student, I don't really want to drink, but I go out and do it because I think everybody else wants to, or I think everyone else is cheating, everyone else is using AI for their papers or whatever. And so I don't mention that I think it's a bad idea, or I don't mention that I don't want to drink or something like that. There's a little bit of that going on, I think, where, well, everybody else is voting, everybody else thinks the same. And, I know I'm different, I'm special, I'm more nuanced, I make nuanced decisions, but everybody else makes, one-dimensional kinds of decisions.
I'm not entirely sure. And this is completely anecdotal, of course, but I think that especially now, maybe not so much in the past, maybe it was, I don't know, but people seem to be increasingly comfortable with making non-nuanced decisions on things.
Well, I will say that this is a very, they call it a heuristic in the paper. They call it the value weight heuristic. So they're trying to, name a new heuristic here. But I do think it's true that it's somewhat heuristic thinking in that, frankly, it's really not that important why someone we don't know voted for Trump or chose a certain light bulb. I mean, we're standing in line and the person in front of us bought the same light bulb that we did. Okay. It's really not that important why they did that. It's really not that important why someone we don't know chose to live in a city with great weather or less great weather. And so there would be no real reason to think more deeply about someone's thinking process and reasoning, because, again, we're sort of cognitive misers. We're somewhat, lazy thinkers in that we want to save our resources for stuff that's more relevant to us. And so we're naturally going to do that. I think we're exposed to more people now not through more people in a casual way, right? Through social media and that kind of stuff. So there's more people. I don't know. Can we call those people in our lives if they're on social media and we've never met them? I'm not sure, but there's more sort of, humanity in a weird kind of way in our lives that we need to quickly categorize friend, foe, whether that's Trump voter, Clinton voter, whether that's, there's an male, female, right?
Mm-hmm.
These sort of, race, black, white, mixed race. We're making these decisions maybe more often. We're trying to organize a more chaotic world, and maybe we're then using heuristics more often. If we lived in a little bitty town where we kind of knew everybody, would we be doing this? I don't know. It's like, oh, I went to kindergarten through high school with that person, and I don't know.
So, see, the reason why I'm asking this question, and then this kind of relates to a reflection that I had on my time as an undergraduate. So when I was an undergraduate at university, I was really jealous of the time that my parents had when they were undergraduates, right? Because that was all protests and there were political movements, and my generation was seen as being very apathetic. Politically apathetic.
What years were you in college?
I started as an undergraduate, I think, in 2001. When was the 9/11? Was 2001, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, just after 9/11 happened, that was when I became a university student.
Oh, okay.
So right through the war in Iraq, and Afghanistan. So my generation was regarded by my parents' generation as being very politically apathetic. There weren't, there were political movements obviously on campus, but there was none of this kind of the zeal that was characterized by the civil rights movement and by earlier generations that were protesting against the war in Vietnam and stuff like that. And so I kind of felt like a bit jealous of my parents. I would have loved to have been around in that time when there was more of a political movement. I think my mum was even so stupid to go around singing Ho Chi Minh, Ho 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 Chi Minh, which is just like, I can't believe I felt jealous of that, because how idiotic was that? But anyway, I did, because I was moronic and a teenager, as teenagers tend to be. So anyway, yeah, my generation was very looked upon as being very apathetic, whereas the current generation of university students, with all of the kind of UCLA, Columbia, Palestine madness that is going on, is being seen as very, very political, harkening back to my parents' generation in terms of political. And I can see why, I can feel why that would have been appealing to an 18-year-old me, right? Because it would have been this kind of this self-righteous indignation that I kind of craved for in my teens, but didn't have, because the environment wasn't set up for it, right? And so when we start to talk about these teenagers in this generation being very, very political versus mine being apathetic, I'm not sure that they are very political. And this is something I think perhaps that this study is kind of alluding to, is that, what is the function of these protests? Are these protests really fundamentally about Palestine? Or is it more of an excuse to have a party? An excuse to kind of show your commitment to a cause and thereby raise your own social status. And one of the reasons why, and I don't have any direct evidence to infer causation, but I do have some kind of anecdotal evidence, and these may very well be cherry-picked, and I may be wrong, but I think it's worth pointing them out. Have you seen the videos of the people going to these protests and asking them, what are you protesting from? From the river to the sea, which river, which sea? Have you seen any of those videos?
Oh yeah.
They have no idea. they literally, they don't even know the Mediterranean.
Yeah. Well, here's my question for you then. Well, okay. Well, let me ask you first. So, like, I'm not really seeing your connection, so you'll have to explain it, because I don't want to ask.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, explain the connection that you see with that and the study.
Well, so so why did you vote for Trump? So you assume that you vote for Trump because of immigration, right? That's the assumption. Why are you protesting for Palestine? Well, you assume it's about Palestine. Is it really?
Oh, you mean the observers. So as an observer, I'm assuming that people are protesting legitimately for Palestine.
For Palestine, okay. Yeah. And I'm not sure that they are. Yeah. I don't think that they are.
Yeah.
Some, of course, and again, I don't have any evidence to back this up. But, for example, you're seeing some people saying, well, okay, you're protesting for Palestine because you're protesting for Palestine. Okay, that's a reasonable assumption to make, given all the flags that are flying around. And then you're assuming that they're anti-Semitic as well, which, again, is not an ununderstandable assumption to make. But seriously, I mean, given the lack of knowledge that these people have on any of these topics, I seriously doubt that A, it's about Palestine, or B, about a dislike for Jewish people either. And it's just simply a fashion. An absurd and foolish one, but I don't know. I just see people making assumptions for other people's motivations to do a certain behavior, and I'm skeptical of that, and I think that paper gives me some reason to be skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's easy for even for those of us, again, looking on the outside, to assume bad motives also, right? Like we can assume oh, they just want to protest. I mean, we could assume that also, right?
Right.
A reason, right? And there's never a reason, right?
No.
I mean, there's never the reason. I shouldn't say that. The reason. There's multiple reasons, for all of these things. But I agree. It does seem, certainly for some, I'm sure that there are some that are,
of course,
all in, and are very knowledgeable and have made their decision thoughtfully and everything. As is true for, as would be true for voting or buying a light bulb. There are some people who would make that decision very thoughtfully And there are others who would just, just grab whatever is at eye level, right? So that's how they
Right.
get us,
And again,
so.
you can make the same comparison to the kind of, I mean, I've done it with the Israel Palestine lot. I don't think that many of them, some of them certainly, but I don't think that many of them really know what they're protesting about, other than kind of like the vagaries of it. But the same is true for MAGA voters. From my observation. So when you start to kind of take a dive into the kind of the Twitter stroke X MAGA kind of spaces and the rhetoric they're coming out with, a lot of them are coming out with very, very openly pro Iran propaganda. I mean, again, Jackson Hinkle, who's the biggest kind of MAGA communist kind of account on Twitter, is coming out with constant memes about Iran and how wonderful Iran is and how they're going to show Israel everything. And he's completely ignorant of the fact that Trump, well, I don't know whether he's ignorant or I don't know what's going on, but he's seemingly ignorant of the fact that Trump was very, very hawkish on Iran, way more hawkish than Biden was. So, why is he voting for Trump? I mean, what is going on here? You would assume that, okay, this guy is celebrating Donald Trump, and one of the reasons he would be celebrating Donald Trump would be one of his keystone policy, foreign policy areas, which would be, being hawkish against Iran. And yet he's celebrating Iran, which contravenes Donald Trump's policy. It's not clear what is going on. But what is clear is people don't believe in causes for the neat reasons we would like to assume they do, because they would follow logically in a kind of in an easy pattern. It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah,
so that's what I have to say on that.
Yeah, people are complicated. Voting is complicated, and look, I mean, we've all been guilty of showing up and being like, well, I don't even know. I didn't even know I was supposed to vote on that. Vote for that. I don't know, whatever, office it was. Oh shoot, I didn't even know that was, a thing, right? Because I didn't. I'll just vote for, the Democrat, or I'll vote for the Republican because, it's like the category thing, or whatever, And so we've all been, we certainly have all been guilty of making superficial decisions, and we do, and we have to all day. Like we couldn't possibly think deeply about every decision we have to make in our lives. We would be exhausted.
Well, yeah,
and so so sometimes we then are guilty of over inferring motives based on choice. So using
I don't know how much time you've or how close you've been to politics on a national level, but when I was in my early 20s, I was a candidate for the National Union of Students in the UK, which is kind of like a big, really big body, and NUS, and there is an NUS conference where the idea of which is that the people who are candidates will go along and make a speech and try and persuade people to vote for them. And so I prepared for that. I prepared a really, really good speech, and I gave the speech. I delivered it really, really well, and I got like a really good reception, but I didn't get elected in. And the reason why I didn't get elected in, as I found out, was because I remember I hooked up with this random girl, and I asked her, like, as kids do at conferences, right? And I asked her, so did you vote for me? And she was like, oh no, I couldn't. And I was, why not? Oh, because we already had our votes organized by the time we got on the bus. So they had some activists on the bus who had persuaded them all to vote in a certain way and got them all tribally aligned with that kind of decision before they even got to the conference. And so the speeches that were moot, essentially. And thereby the whole process of the whole thing of the conference was essentially a charade. And this was coming with somebody who liked me, obviously, because I hooked up with her. So I think political activists are aware of this. right? They're aware of the notion that people are not making choices for, on the basis of policy, but rather as a kind of tribal alignment type thing.
Well, yeah, or even if they are making choices on the basis of policy, as your previous point made, it's not actual policy; it's what they think the policy is, right? And then decisions are made, long before election day. I'm sure that again, some people make the choice, like their pencil hovers right over the, or their ink pen hovers right over the thing, but lots of times, like, who goes to a rally? Who goes to a Biden or a Trump rally? People who are already predisposed, most likely. I don't think a lot of people who aren't sure go to the rally, right? So, I don't know, where people are getting their information from all kinds of different sources and making choices in ways that we can't possibly be privy to. But the idea that it's the most, that we're assuming others are making those decisions. So if a neighbor puts a Trump sign in their yard, or a Biden sign in their yard, one of the dangers of that, I guess, based on, if we extrapolate the study, one of the dangers of that would be that others would make assumptions about you that are unnuanced and perhaps would spark neighbor rivalry, right? Inappropriate comments or whatever. And so we seem to have so much. I agree with you. I feel like we have a lot more of that now. It seems, but again, I'm wondering if it's kind of because we have so many more people in our lives right now through technology, that we absolutely have to categorize more, not less, because otherwise our world is too overwhelming.
Well, some of us do. Some others of us stubbornly refuse to engage on social media at all.
That would be me. Yes.
And I'm not questioning the wisdom of that whatsoever, by the way. There are costs of doing that, certainly, but there are also obvious benefits as well. But another thing I would mention is that, like, I have friends who voted for Donald Trump, and I think I have a fairly good grip on why they voted for Donald Trump. And some of them had, they had their reasons. I'm not going to go so far as to say good reasons. But they certainly had
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I mean, okay, Biden seems to be a geriatric. He seems to be a, part of a kind of an unchanging system that has left working class America behind. That the Democrat Party was supposed to be the kind of left-wing party in America and was supposed to be for the working classes, but now has drifted away from that and is representing a neoliberal capitalist elite, if you like. I'm not saying that I agree with that position, but I can certainly see where people are coming from when they would say something like that, right? And I think that probably to a significant extent, that's why a lot of decent, and they are decent, and well-meaning Trump voters come from. And I would agree that we shouldn't demonize somebody because they're voting for Trump. That said, if we go back to the, if we're able to put Amazon Turk 1930s Germany, which we can't do, but if we had those kind of magical powers, how many of the people voting for Hitler would have been for gassing the Jews and starting World War II? Probably few.
Right.
And if you were to give that, they probably would have been against both of those things. And that's even without the evidence of history, right? We don't. This is what Hitler really believes.
Yeah, because when they first voted for Hitler, he wasn't saying let's gas the Jews.
So policy number one.
Yeah, exactly.
Strengthen the border, strike through, gas the Jews. So, so the point I want to make is that, while these idiotic kids protesting for Palestine, or these MAGA people, being involved with causes that are pro-Islamic Republic of Iran, while there might be nothing nefarious with them as individuals and no malintent, the lack of malintent doesn't preclude the possibility of malevolent consequences from their actions, and that's really, really, really important. That this madness of crowds, it doesn't reveal evil on a, again, an intentional level, but that, again, it doesn't mean that there won't be evil consequences because of it, and so therefore there has to be some system of consequences, even for people who do bad things without meaning to. A consequence for kind of manslaughter, for example, if somebody commits manslaughter, they didn't intend to kill somebody. If, for example, I drink a bottle of vodka and decide to drive to the nearby supermarket to go and buy more vodka, and I hit somebody and kill them on the way, I didn't intend to kill that person.
It makes you no less guilty of killing.
Well, it doesn't mean I'm guilty of murder. There are mitigating circumstances, but there has to be a kind of consequence for those kind of actions, and so when I'm all for forgiving people for going along with and voting for Trump, but given we talked about this last time, given the evidence that all of the people that Trump himself appointed and put around him, in positions of power, pretty much all of them, up and including Mike Pence, have said, look, this guy's a danger and should never be let anywhere near office. If you've seen all of that evidence and you're still going to vote for Trump, does that mean you're an evil person? No. Does it mean that you intend to there being an end to the liberal order and all of the horrible things that will follow from that? No, you don't mean to do that. But if you don't see that as a significant danger, then you're behaving in a very, very reckless way, and there needs to be consequences for those actions.
So let's just say we do this study again. Okay. We do it now. Okay. I don't know. What do you think would be the most, first of all, we do the pre-study. What's the most extreme position that each of the candidates holds? I'm trying to think. So reparations. Reparations
for the Biden side would be the most extreme.
We're not hearing any. I don't think we're hearing anything.
No, I'm saying what would be the most extreme. No, I know, what is the most extreme. I mean, he's not suggesting that, but I'm saying, but because the point is not.
Well, I'm just
Trump
trying to think.
No.
I'm trying to think what people would literally rank right now, not like what could be. Like,
what people would rank as the.
I mean, certainly Trump talks still a lot about immigration.
Yes.
So Trump could definitely be immigration.
No, so Trump
perhaps
Trump is gone farther than that. So Trump is talking about mass deportations, basically, of everybody.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so an extreme position, do you think that would be still the most?
So yeah, but let's
rank it.
Let's qualify how extreme Trump's rhetoric on immigration is. Because you can make a very good case, for example, to say that certain limitations should be put on immigration because of people trafficking or drugs or potentially terrorists getting into the United States. Those would be reasonable things, given that, from a black and white legal perspective, America wants none of that. However, the problem with immigration in the United States is that, if you were to achieve what Trump says he wants, right? Which is, you stop pretty much all illegal immigration and you deport all the illegal immigrants back to wherever they came from, then food production in the United States would shrink rapidly. and it would probably cause famine in the developing world and a massive hike in food prices in the United States, right? So that's the, it's worth qualifying how extreme Trump's suggested policy on immigration is. Do I think he would go that far in reality? No, because he's a pragmatist. He would realize that it would be a disaster. So yeah, immigration is clear. That's the clear kind of right wing extreme.
So you think that still would exist as the high. So if we had immigration, foreign policy, economic policy, environment, and
but the left wing, the extreme inferred left wing position is open borders. And I'm not saying that the United States has open borders. I'm just saying that's what the right wing critics seem to think.
But so you're saying then that they would, so a Trump voter. So in today's, if we did the study now, you think that both sides, so a Biden voter would say that a Trump voter is voting for Trump because of immigration, and that a Trump voter would say that a Biden voter is also voting for Biden because of immigration. So you think that now they
Correct.
would be in agreement. Okay.
There would be an agreement. And the other one, that the Trump voters and the big wrong voters would agree on would be that the Biden voters are essentially communists that are trying to turn the kids gay.
So
that's what I think. That's what I think they think about Biden.
Trump voters would think Biden voters also want
to turn the kids gay and or trans.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Because some weirdo on TikTok, and you can extrapolate from the arguments of a few weirdos on TikTok a whole set of behaviors for a whole party that has never endorsed any of those things, nor would they. But that's what they think.
That's not on the list now. I mean, that wasn't on the list before, so it was, but potentially you're saying that if Trump voters would put that high as a reason why Biden voters would be voting for Biden. So it would be like first immigration and then sort of
gay communism,
gender stuff.
Gay communism is the preferred terms amongst their cohort, and I'm not exaggerating. Okay. No, but seriously, I mean, like, if you listen to, which I do, right? So I listen to the left and I listen to the right. I listen to their mouthpieces, their big YouTube channels, and so on and so forth. Yeah, gay communism is the actual words used.
Okay. I'll have to. I don't know if I should Google that or not.
No, I tell you what. No, you can do it. Here's one to Google. This is a particularly funny one. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it. What's the big LGBT organization in America? The UK one is Stonewall. The biggest American LGBT thing. I'm just not drawing it on it at the moment. They entered into a kind of partnership with Oreo. Who make the biscuits, Oreo biscuits. And then some right-wing American think tank put out like a video on YouTube on and Rumble saying, the kind of gruffly masculine voice like this. Pictures of kids in the 1970s and 1980s eating Oreo, presumably taken from Oreo commercials. Oreo was the family-friendly cookie we used to enjoy. Generations have loved Oreo. But now, are Oreo trying to corrupt your children? Because they'd signed some kind of
that they were part of like a cancellation attempt, but I didn't
know because why. So the inference was that Oreo is going to turn your kids gay. So, but what I'm trying to say is this stuff sounds. I would hope to a reasonable person, this stuff just sounds so fantastical that it's comical, right? It's kind of like it's almost like a joke. It's almost like something that would turn up in a 1990s comedy program, Oreo has signed an agreement with some gay charity, and therefore, if you eat Oreo, your kids are going to become gay or at risk of becoming gay, as if, that was a bad thing, by the way. That would be funny in the 1990s, but now that's reality. That's what some people actually think.
Well, and again,
And we've come across them before, haven't we?
yes, we have. It's like, I don't know how we're going to, if we are assuming this level of simplicity in anyone that we disagree with, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to start talking to one another civilly again, And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this article, because I think this is normal human behavior on the one hand, but as you pointed out at the very beginning, it seems like we're more willing or more enthusiastically doing the the easy thing about more people.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that is the extreme position, and the extreme position exists, and the extreme position is worryingly widespread.
Yeah.
But I don't think most Trump voters would believe that. Oh God, I hope they don't believe that. God, imagine if there was a majority of Trump voters who actually believed that. Imagine if it was 60%. Imagine if it was 30%.
I don't know.
I mean, Parish. Well, no, we don't know, right? We don't. So we don't know. Let me roll this back a bit. Trump, the first time round, was relatively innocuous compared to this time round, in my opinion. I'm not saying he was innocuous. I'm saying he's relatively innocuous. And Trump's supporters were similarly relatively innocuous. And again, I don't know how extreme the Trump contingent are. And I have no way. There's no evidence. Well, there's a little bit, isn't there? But there's not much evidence for me to gauge that. But they are extreme. Whereas I don't think I see many people who would vote for Biden adopting the kind of extreme positions that the right would allege that they had. I don't know what you think.
Yeah. I mean, well, again, there's no reason for me to believe that psychology on the right is any different than psychology on the left. So I would have to say that I think probably people are doing, it's like, we're still, human psychology. There's no reason for me to think that it wouldn't be the same. So,
so they're mostly reasonable people. Mostly.
Yeah. But also mostly reasonable people who are making mostly, they're over inferring motives, in the same ways, on both sides. If we trust these like 7 studies to sort of, guide, again, I don't want to overemphasize one paper with 7 studies, but at the same time, it makes sense that we do this, particularly, again, the psychology of a stranger. So, Dan McAdams would say that, what we know when we know someone's traits, for example, is the psychology of a stranger. So we can get that, like if we're standing in the grocery store line, so we're going to check out and stuff. And we have somebody who's, like clipped coupons and who's, got their cash down to the penny and who's, watching the cash register go and all that kind of stuff. We could make some assumptions about that person's personality based on some of the behavioral traits that they are, showing. And maybe they talk to us or they talk to the cashier. So we think they're more, so we think, oh, they're very conscientious and they're also very outgoing. They're an extrovert, and, that kind of thing. So what we, so that's like the psychology of a stranger. So that's the, this sort of, what they call, ocean. Openness. I didn't learn at Ocean, so it's harder for me, but that's the way people have learned it. So it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay. So people are very varying degrees. And so Dan McAdams would say this is the psychology of a stranger. You can kind of pick that up from, minimal exposure to people. And then the next thing is if you were going to know somebody, you would start to know some of their motives or their goals. Okay, so they would share a little bit more about, again, this is maybe somebody that you know at work, not a relative stranger, and you're sort of getting the idea that they're maybe, scouting around for someone to date, or that they're, scouting around for somebody to have drinks with to maybe get a promotion. You sort of, give these sort of like buying a house, sort of motives and goals kinds of things. So that's sort of in the middle. And then when do you really know somebody? You know them when you know their story.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you know someone, when you know their story. And that's when you know someone's personality also, when you know their story. So traits are the personality of a stranger. Motives and goals are sort of the personality of an acquaintance. And then a story is the personality of, someone that you truly know. And there's not a lot of people whose stories we can know. We just can't possibly know that many people's stories to truly know. And how would we know why someone voted? Like some of the friends that you have, why they voted the way that they voted, because you know some of their stories, right? You know their backstory. You know something about their childhood. You know more about them. And so, we just can't possibly know people's stories based on, a sign they put in their front yard. And yet we often act as if we
do. So I had a very, very dark thought. Very, very dark thought. So based on everything you've said, which strikes me as plausible enough to act on as if true, we shouldn't make judgments about people just because they voted for Trump or just because they voted for Biden or whatever. We should, keep an open mind, and we should treat them as individuals. Here is my dark thought. What if the assuming extreme intentions has a kind of utility? Right? What if that assuming extreme intentions in others is actually an adaptive quality? So,
like war.
Well, no, not even that far, right? So, for example, what is it that stops a potential Nazi party getting into power, right? Or a communist party? So for example, I have met and been friends with people who would describe themselves as communists, but I actually think are liberal. They're for a very kind of utopian kind of communism that I don't agree with. I don't think it could ever exist. But at the same time, there would have been people that spoke out against Stalin and Mao. Take the Japanese Communist Party, for example, as an institution. The Japanese Communist Party has been around for donkey's years, actually has a little bit of influence in Japan. And yet it is very, very, very anti-Chinese Communist Party, was very anti the Soviet Union, and existed as an organization. So I would, and it worked within liberal democracy and never tried to stage a revolution in which they seized power. So I would regard that, I would say that is more than enough evidence to say that the Japanese Communist Party is liberal, in my point of view. Does that mean that I agree with their policies, or I think that if they were in power, everything would be as wonderful as they do? No, absolutely not. I wouldn't even vote for them. But that doesn't preclude them being liberal, right? They have participated within liberal democracy. They are not arguing for a dictatorship of the proletariat. They're heavily influenced by Marx in ways that I don't agree with, but they are liberal, right? And so, if I meet a member of the Japanese Communist Party, I'm not going to presume that they are in favor of Maoism or anything like that, because I know that they're not. But what if the stigma value that we attach to values like, for example, communism has an adaptive quality insofar as it prevents actual kind of communist institutions like the CCP or the Bolsheviks taking over a society? Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are, we should probably do a paper we should talk about, so certainly there are psychological theories that actually, explore this,
Hmm.
and, intergroup emotion theory, and some of those, along those lines. And so I would agree with you. And I think that, I mean, where I thought you were going to go with this
Okay.
was, for example, the, Israel invasion of Gaza. It is helpful when you are at war to assume you know everything you need to know about your enemy,
Oh, of course, yeah.
right? And so, from an evolutionary standpoint, like you said, an adaptive standpoint, it's enough to know you're wearing the other uniform, right? Or it's enough to know that you're over on this border or whatever. And I think that probably is adaptive in that situation. I mean, we've talked about, we've talked about a version of this before where you have, really good, you can have, really good skills for a bad or dangerous environment, you know, like evolution, right? Like, it's
Mm,
kind of unlikely that we've all made it this far.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so, and, the kinds of skills that have allowed us to make it this far have probably made us, um, in some cases, categorizing things as good for me, bad for me overly quickly, right? Just because it's safer that way. Um, are not really great skills for a good and safe environment. And so what you just proposed, which is, what if it's adaptive to do this? And I think you're probably right. It is adaptive. And in a bad environment, in an unsafe, dangerous, maybe war-torn or similar kinds of situation, then when there really are lots of dangers out there, it is adaptive. And then in a safer environment, it's unfortunately, a little bit harmful to our intergroup and interpersonal relationships.
So let me give you a specific example of this. So, the absolute appalling horror that happened on the 7th, and, the rape and murder and torture and all kinds of things. And then, the bodies of naked women being driven back over the border, being paraded around. I mean, it's hard to think of anything that could be more shocking than that. And certainly the people who carried it out are responsible for evil, on a scale that we seldom see. I mean, similar kind of stuff is happening, by the way, in China, among suppressed people there, but it's not advertised. This was advertised.
Right.
They were proud of this, right? And we were seeing people running out in the streets and celebrating it. And so the natural connection in the human brain, and certainly in my brain, is to look at those people who are celebrating it and think that they are celebrating the act in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably not true, right? Probably, some of them were. Probably the reason why many of them were celebrating it was just because they were showing social cohesion. Everyone's running out in the streets, therefore I'm just going to run out in the streets and do the same thing. I have an example a benign example to draw a comparison with. When I first moved to Japan, I was dating this Japanese girl, and we walked past this donut shop, and there was a massive line outside the donut shop, and she had to join the line. She was like, "Oh, there are so many people queuing up for this donut. That means it must be good. That means I must join the line and participate in it, right?" Which it has a kind of logic. I don't, maybe I think the donut. She didn't even really like donuts. So maybe the donut, if there's a long line, that's reasonable evidence to conclude that the donut might be really that good, and therefore it might not be a waste of your time to join the line. So there's nothing evil inherently in doing that. But I think that when you see like polls of Palestinians coming out and saying that they think Hamas are great, or the rest of it, which exists. I'm not sure that they're really deeply thinking about Hamas or what they do. And when you see the celebrations in the 7th, these people coming out and celebrating these absolutely appalling incidents, I'm not sure that all of those people really have thought deeply about what it is they're running out into the streets and celebrating. Not least because some of them can't possibly have done so because they're small children, right? There were small children running around in the streets. They can't have thought deeply. They don't have the intellectual capacity to do that.
Yeah, and so that's where, again, that's where this sort of like this story comes in, right? Like they have a whole different story about why, and it may just be because their friends were doing, running out into the street. I mean, there's, the story doesn't have to have anything. It can have almost no overlap except the most superficial way with the, with this other narrative that's going on halfway around the world or even next door. It can just have so we're just inferring, all the time what's going on in other people's, minds and lives.
Well, I mean, an even more classic example would be, I don't know, NFL, right? Or, even better, English football. Do you know about hooliganism in England?
No, but I have heard the term for sure.
So a football hooligan is it's spread across the world now, but it's originally English, distinctly English. A football hooligan is somebody who is a supporter of a football team, right? And a football team doesn't really have a political position. It's not like Labour or the Tories or the Lib Dems, right? And they viscerally hate supporters of the rival football team, and they will just attack them, like physically.
Right.
And like in the 1970s and it's still a problem now in the UK, but in the 1970s and the 1980s, it was a huge thing. And they've got kind of a handle on it, but it was really, really bad. These gangs, well, they still exist, these gangs of hooligans, like literally attacking each other. I think people have been killed for a sports team.
Actually, someone here in the States was killed recently. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I think he had a heart attack. There was a fight, and so he died. And again, sort of like what you're talking about before. It's like, obviously no one, he was not killed, but he was, within the altercation, someone died. So, but that's far more, and I certainly hadn't heard that particular term.
But that's just, but that's just a sports team is a narrative for the sake of a narrative,
right?
There's no like, and fine, by the way, if you want to go and enjoy that as a pastime, I'm not condemning it. I'm not saying it's evil. Like, great, explore that aspect of human psychology and enjoy it in a kind of contained way, like a sports stadium. Wonderful, great. But when people are prepared to shed blood on behalf of that, kind of indicates the problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, hopefully, just having read this and maybe having listened to it, it'll give people a little more reason to think about people's backstories.
Yes. So
we don't have to forget. We don't have to forgive them for it. Just because they have a backstory doesn't mean we have to. It doesn't mean we have to believe it. No. Fall in love with it or anything like that. But hopefully it'll. If we talk to each other more.
Right. So this relates to kind of something that a conversation I had with James a while back when I talked to him about, okay, what if we have these, because I gave him the example of, okay, somebody that I used to work with who invented a racism in me that kind of got me one of the woke bullyings that I got when she said that because I complimented her on her English, even though she said, oh, my English is not good enough. I said, no, it's great. Because I said that I was actually meaning the opposite and I was trying to other her. And it caused all kinds of bad consequences for me. But it been, I actually believed that she believed that I was genuinely trying to other her, even though clearly I wasn't. And I spoke to James about that and I said, you know, what do we do about these people? These people who have no ill intent, but they cause awful consequences because they get things wrong. And I'm not sure I agree with James, but he has a point. And James was like, yes, that's true. There are people out there who are like that, but we have to give them extreme consequences. You know, typically James, he wants them all to be in prison, because they. I agree there should be some consequences. I wouldn't go as far as the kind of consequences that he would suggest, but I get where he's coming from, because they show such bad judgment. And having such bad judgment has to be considered a kind of evil in and of itself, because it leads to evil consequences. So yes, I'm. You know, if
Yeah,
you are,
yeah. So I would
go
argue
on.
that because all day long, every day, all day long, we make crappy choices for stupid reasons. And we just, here's the thing, like most of them don't have any consequences that we're aware of. They have consequences, but we're not aware of them. And so, I mean, I just think that, you know, yeah, I mean, and you know what? I don't know who's going to decide when the consequences are what are such. And you know, I don't want to be the decider, or maybe I do want to be the decider and I don't want anybody else to be, you know,
Which is
but
dangerous.
you know, yeah,
Which is
that's what I'm
dangerous,
saying.
right?
It's
Yeah.
dangerous no matter how you think of it. So, yeah, so I would just like for all of us to talk to each other more, and hear each
Which
other's
is what
stories.
liberalism allows for, right? And that's arguably why liberalism succeeds where other societies fail, even though what seems to be a weakness, which is this our inability to communicate and our inability to form a clear decision, seems to be a weakness, but actually it isn't, right? Because when you have somebody in dictatorship Y, who is very quickly able to pick a certain route, more often than not, because nobody's challenging them and holding them to account, it turns out to be the wrong route, and that dictatorship fails, as was the case with the Soviet Union, as is increasingly clear is becoming the case with Russia, and also the Chinese Communist Party too. I mean, they're all kind of failing or failed states, whereas liberal states where, you know, umming and ahhing about everything, actually, when we do eventually make a decision, turns out to be a really good one, even though we've spent far too long considering it. And even though the correct answer was there 10 years ago, we're, you know,
That's Churchill, that, you know, like when all else fails, America will do the right thing or something like that.
it could be. I mean, Churchill certainly said that. I mean, okay, we're going down another rabbit hole now, but you know, liberalism. This is why, like, I think that you actually, Elizabeth, you are currently living in the British Empire. I genuinely believe that. I genuinely believe that. I know you don't have jacks and kings and queens or anything like that, but you are living culturally within the British Empire, right? Liberalism is a cultural artifact of England, and it spreads. That's true, right? It comes from England, and it spreads out from England, and it spread into America by English people moving to America. And when the founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution and so on and so forth, they were articulating the values that they grew up in, that what they considered to be right. You know, and I've said this before, if you go and took those documents and went to a tribe in the rainforest and in the Amazon and taught them how to read, and then expect them to have like a separation of powers, and it wouldn't work, right? You know, it has to. It only worked in America because it stuck onto English liberal values. There was a point where the Empire and the United States were competing powers, the Revolutionary War, clearly. But certainly since World War II, and this has been speeded up by, you know, unimaginably by the inventor of the internet, which allows the kind of conversation that we're having right now to happen. The Anglosphere is on a convergence course because the cultural values are essentially the same. And there are differences, but then, you know, there are cultural differences between people in Boston and people in LA, right? But the similarities are more consequential than the differences. And that's why I think that you're living in the British Empire. Because culturally you are. And I'm not saying that the most consequential part of it is London, by the way. I don't think that. It's clearly Washington, D.C. And I think Churchill kind of understood that. And I think that he understood that we are kind of the same people. And I don't mean that in an ethnic sense. And that's one of the great strengths of Englishness, because it never really has been an ethnic thing. In that, you know, we are a people, like, I've lived in Japan for 15 years. Who would say I was Japanese? Nobody. But if I emigrated to America tomorrow and I became an American citizen and I said I'm an American, I think most Americans would accept that.
Yep.
Certainly most British people would too. So we are people that you can become, which precludes a sense of ethnic identity, which is a wonderfully advanced and beautiful thing about us, because other cultures just don't have that. Anyway, on that note, yes, you probably don't know why somebody voted for Trump, and you shouldn't assume the worst, but don't assume the worst, but also don't let them off the hook entirely either, because, you know, you can be perfectly... You should call them a silly sausage or something along those lines. You know, they might have voted for Trump for all of the best of reasons, but even if you're voting for somebody for all of the best of reasons, it still can turn out to be an absolute shit show, as was the case in Germany, and as will be the case if that fat man gets back into power again. And we know this because all of the people that he picked and put into positions around him have basically come out and said exactly the same. They probably would know. Listen to them, please.
Yeah.
Good. And on that note, thank you very much.